Hello there. As you can probably see what I'm going through, I'm going to go through why most AAA games have no soul. And not necessarily that I don't have issues with what the video says in its content, it's more of what I have an issue of the implications of it, and also on necessarily saying that AAA games don't have souls seems to be obfuscating the real issue from these games, not necessarily that the games themselves are soulless, because I don't necessarily think it's easy to quantify if a game has soul or not. It's very subjective, at least in my understanding of it, because, like, as you can see on the screen with all these games that are coming about, Ubisoft's obviously one of those mentioned. Like, is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for example, excuse the microtransactions and whatnot, soulless? I mean, it's a game that a lot of Assassin's Creed fans, at least OG fans, don't necessarily like, and I don't necessarily like it either, but I don't necessarily think it's fair to say it has no soul, because to me that just seems like it's a bit of a stretch and not really used for any other purpose other than just saying, I really hate the game, but I want to say it in a different way, so I'll say it has no soul. And that's necessarily my issue with this term. So I just want to go through this video because it's a thing that I normally see around the gaming community, and I just want to see the arguments of this video because it does say a lot of similar ones that other videos also go about. So yeah, and also if you do want to watch this video, it's in the link in the description. So yeah.
What is happening to the studios we loved? How can they make some of the greatest games of all time, then turn around and just make disappointment after disappointment? It felt like the end of AAA games, but then Elden Ring came out. Why is Elden Ring such a breath of fresh air when most other AAA games feel copy-pasted? And why did this game cause so much controversy?
Elden Ring is Game of the Year? The game is
Man, to answer these questions, we first need to understand that when Elden Ring came out, the game defied everyone's expectation. Elden Ring sold 12 million copies in the first 2 weeks. Even Miyazaki, the mastermind behind Elden Ring, was surprised by this.
So obviously, the setup here is saying that Elden Ring is a successful game because it does things that are different from other games, which that's not necessarily saying that other AAA games have no soul. That's just necessarily saying that Elden Ring was different from the current market, and because of its difference, it was a lot more attractive to a lot of other people, especially because on how From Software has established its own identity as a studio, and so recognizable that from different games and whatnot, that having an open world with Elden Ring made it not only easier for RPG fans who enjoyed like Skyrim and like Ubisoft open world games to enter into, but also to have this big contrast of this isn't the same game I've played before, this is a new different type of game and I haven't experienced, and it's a lot better. That's not necessarily saying Ubisoft games are soulless and Elden Ring has soul in it. That's not really, at least in my understanding, a very easy way to justify that. It's just, it's a very different game, and it's a game that feels very fresh because not a lot of games are like From Software games. But yeah.
Success. And to put the sales into context, Elden Ring at release was on pace to sell the same amount of copies as some of the best-selling open-world games of the last decade. GTA 5, Skyrim, and Breath of the Wild. I mean, if you really think about it, Elden Ring should not have been performing as well as these other games. Don't get me wrong, Elden Ring is an incredible game, but most FromSoft games are pretty niche, and usually target a more hardcore and advanced player base. By nature, FromSoft games shouldn't sell as much as Zelda or GTA, but this time, Elden Ring did. Why? What was different about Elden Ring, and what set it apart from other FromSoft games? The answer? Nothing really. Yes, Elden Ring was open world, so unlike other Souls games, you could avoid certain bosses and areas. Yes, the lore was some of the best I'd ever seen in a game. The world was so immersive that I don't think I could ever find everything in the mysterious world of the lands between. Seriously, Elden Ring is a masterpiece. Go play this game. But I would argue that almost every FromSoft game is a masterpiece too, and just like the other Souls games, Elden Ring still targets a hardcore player base, and the gameplay is still punishing as hell. So why then is Elden Ring capturing a much larger chunk of the gaming market? There is a huge demand for high-quality AAA games.
Now, necessarily, this is going to be one of the points where he's going to say, because it has soul and whatnot, and expand on that. But I also think one of the factors that made Elden Ring a lot more popular than I think a lot of people thought it was going to be was because Elden Ring and the From Software's community in general had a huge voice in the gaming community. From Software has been, throughout its years, since Dark Souls 1 launched, has been a darling of the gaming community. They not necessarily could do no wrong, but they could do very few things wrong, and that perception sort of fed into itself into a cycle, which have eventually caused them to be one of the most beloved gaming companies. And because of that, it sort of is one of those situations where if there's nothing but positivity about a specific company, a lot of people are going to listen to that and buy their products. It's one of those things that makes games like, for example, Ubisoft games sort of weird to talk about because there's not a lot of positivity around those games. If you go on any community space, it's always negativity about their games. But if you go into From Software games, it's always about positivity. And since it's niche, it's necessarily harder to get the word out. But since all that the discussion is positivity, and when it goes into any mainstream context, a lot of people are going to see, wow, these games are really popular and a lot of people like them, I'll go check it out. While with Ubisoft, since it's mainstream, it doesn't really require the positivity. But again, Elden Ring I think did successful, not necessarily because it's not a good game. I think it being a good game does have a factor in it, but because of its sort of From Software's lineage of positivity from their community and their games caused it to be a lot more popular because of it.
And not much of a supply. I mean, imagine you're at a restaurant and you have a hankering for some steak. They're out of stock. All they have left is some burnt scraps of cooked steak they can shove onto a plate, or you can get a delicious honey-baked ham with a sweet honey drizzle. So although you wanted a steak, you choose the honey-baked ham because the steak scraps just aren't edible. This is the AAA game market we are in right now. Millions of gamers looking at the piss-poor options.
Now that's an analogy I don't really like a lot, because the analogy here is obviously, hey, the AAA gaming space currently is really bad. It's the burnt steak in this analogy, obviously. But I don't necessarily think that's analogous, because what I think a lot of the issues with AAA games is that they're very similar to one another, and there's not a lot of difference between each other. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, that's just the thing it is. And I think the analogy that is better used is that, imagine if you're eating like a fine enough pizza, right? But you've been eating the same pizza for like a month now. For 31 days, you've been eating the same fine pizza. Is the pizza bad? No, not really. It's not that bad. It's just, that's the same pizza, you know? And I think that's a better analogy for the AAA gaming space than just, oh yeah, there's a burnt steak, you know? Oh, and then like there's a honey drizzled ham, you know? And it's like, okay, cool. But, and also the analogy fails in the fact that like, some people want, like for me example, I want games that are like, you know, Bioware games, right? Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, and whatnot. Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and Dragon Age Inquisition. I want a lot more of those games. But to a lot of people, they don't really want that. They want like these isometric RPGs, which is certainly fine for them, but, and that's where the difference comes into. Like those isometric RPGs are those honey drizzled hams, while Bioware games are like, for me, steaks. I want a steak. I don't want a honey drizzled ham. That is just a no-go for me, you know. But yeah, and I just disagree with that analogy.
Praying to Gabe, the god of Steam, to give them anything fun and exciting. It doesn't matter what genre, as long as it's good. Just give us something edible and satisfying. So when Elden Ring came out and the world saw how amazing this game was, people who were originally intimidated by Souls games looked at Elden Ring and said, screw it, let's try it out. I got nothing else to play. So like the guy choosing the ham over the burnt steak, I would argue that Elden Ring's meteoric success is not only a byproduct of how good the game is, but because there's such a small supply of good AAA titles right now. Elden Ring really is the best option on the menu. However, like every industry, there will be people who hate or love something purely because of its popularity. And man, do we have a few in the gaming industry. But what's surprising this time, many of the people who hate Elden Ring are developers at other studios. Infuriating.
Now this is one of those things I really sort of disagree with. It's not like developers hate Elden Ring. It's just the fact that like it's not the games that they're making, nor the games that they're making to appeal to a certain audience. Elden Ring did very well because of a lot of factors, and I think its its overwhelmingly positive community was one of those factors that got Elden Ring to be as big as it was. But I also think that it's not necessarily fair to say that Elden Ring is so successful because it has soul, because I think it's fair to say that Elden Ring is successful because of its uniqueness, as this guy said as well. I think I trailed off there. Oh gosh darn it. Wait. Okay, so like from what we were saying, these developers don't dislike Elden Ring for what it is. They dislike Elden Ring because it's not the games that they play, nor is it the games they make. It's not fair to say to someone that, hey, I don't like this game, I like these games, and call them out on it, saying they hate it. Of course they don't like it, but it's not really a accurate summation of their opinions and the context that it's provided in.
Created by Elden Ring's success.
Same developer who said,
oh yeah, like Elden Ring's UI is so bad that I can only imagine FromSoft devs smoking at their desks or using CRT monitors. And so here's the thing, right? Obviously, this person is talking about that Elden Ring's UI design is gives the player little information, and that's a objectively true. Elden Ring's UI design doesn't give you a lot of information. It gives you like only your required information, obviously, but like I don't think it's fair to say that that's a good or bad thing. It's just a thing. And if you like Elden Ring's minimalist UI design, go ahead, dude. But if you like more UI designs that give the player more information, go for that as well. It's not an inherently good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing that happens. And again, this guy is not saying anything bad about Elden Ring's thing. I mean, he technically is. He's just mostly pointing out that the UI design is minimalistic. He hasn't given an opinion on the game itself.
Elden Ring's UX is so bad I can only imagine FromSoft's devs smoking at their desks and using CRT monitors.
I guess these developers felt that the game violated certain tenets of game development, and by violating these rules of development, Elden Ring didn't deserve its success. Why would these devs be...
One, if you had any any proof of that, of developers saying that, either implying that or outright saying that Elden Ring doesn't deserve its accolades, then I think people would have shown this to literally everyone by now. But so far, all of those developers that have said is that these games are going in different directions than the games that we're making, and we're just voicing our opinions on it. Because it's a huge game, a lot of people are talking about it, and so, you know, it's just a thing that happens. I don't think it's a bad thing or a good thing, it's just a thing. And this, again, sort of deviates from what the actual issue with AAA games now, which is corporations having a lot of control and meddling inside them. A lot of developers want to make really cool games, and some of them can't really do that because of these restraints that corporations have put them on. And it's, you know, that's the real issue here. Not that AAA games have no soul, because it's really hard to quantify and to establish what it means to have no soul. And again, I think this is just such a odd way to talk about this conversation, and it's very detracting from the real issues.
So angry about Elden Ring's success. Who cares if Elden Ring didn't follow the rules of game development? It's not like Elden Ring's success affects them. Well, mostly. I can see why developers like Guerrilla Games were upset. Elden Ring released only 1 week after...
I imagine it's very upsetting to have both Horizon Zero Dawn games releasing like literally at the same time as the two most highly anticipated games in existence. First, the Horizon Zero Dawn game releasing with Breath of the Wild, and then the second one releasing with Elden Ring. It's so funny to me. I don't know why they did that. If they didn't do it like earlier or later, I don't know. It's just so funny to me.
Horizon Forbidden West, so you could say that Elden Ring overshadowed the hype around Horizon. So Horizon possibly didn't perform as expected. The reason is petty, and in no way Elden Ring's fault, but at least I can see where...
And also, what Guerrilla developers have said this? What have they implied this? Like, I haven't seen any tweets or anything else saying that Guerrilla developers care that it's done well, and that they care that they've cared that it's done well because it outperformed Horizon Zero Dawn. Like, this is such a weird like, I'm just thinking what they're thinking, and they must hate it, they must despise it. Oh yes, these bad developers, you know. And I really just dislike this sort of mindset of it, because it's not actually focused on the actual issues. It's just, oh yes, my company's a lot better than that company, and I think it's just really petty.
Where the Guerrilla devs' frustration comes from. But why were Ubisoft devs so upset? None of their sales were affected by the release of Elden Ring. Now, remember, these were only a few people, and not the whole studio, who were angry at Elden Ring. However, the response...
If it was a few people, then why is this, like, look at these videos that he's just shown now, right? It's like, my guy, I just don't get it. I honestly don't get it, how people can just say that Ubisoft is, like, so mad, all of it's mad, when, like, there are like so few people who have ever actually said anything, and what they've said is literally just, this is different and I don't necessarily like it. Like, my guy, this is a lot of just hate and anguish over such a small thing.
From gamers, to not only these devs, but Ubisoft as a whole, showed us something really interesting. Gamers are tired of playing the same thing. We are tired of the formulaic nature of Ubisoft in most other AAA games.
Sure, yeah. It has a satisfying shooter-looter game loop, the graphics are great, the mechanics are well-tuned and executed, and the story's acceptable. Bummer? Yeah, it's exactly the same as all other Ubisoft games. It's just another copy-paste.
You see, when every user interface, every store, and every game looks relatively the same, we notice it's like hotel art. Each piece of art is theoretically different, but somehow feels and functions exactly the same. So when the first few Assassin's Creed games came out, they felt new and exciting. Running around the Holy Land of Rome, leaping off buildings, sneaking around...
No, here's the thing, Ryan. Just because it's not new or fresh doesn't mean it's bad. As the like crack guy just said, right? It's not necessarily like bad. It's just not fresh. It's not new. It's not exciting. Which, if what you consider a good game is something new, then that's certainly a fine opinion to have. But I don't necessarily think that's a sustainable one, because that also implies to having a million different types of Souls-like games. Eventually, there will be so many Souls-like games that are quite alright. Like, imagine this, hypothetical, right? There are as many Souls-like games made by From Software with all the same quality as as there are amount of Assassin's Creed games currently, which is what, like 20 Assassin's Creed games. A lot of people would get tired of that, and a lot of people will say like, no, I'll never get tired of From Software games. They're so good. No, dude, you will get tired of it eventually, okay? Because of the same mechanics, same story beats, same thematics, same lore concepts throughout that ties the whole Souls-like genre together. Like, a lot of people will get tired of this. They just don't want to admit it because, you know, From Software good, Ubisoft bad. It's a very simple argument, and yeah, again, it's not a. If you think that new thing or something that is new is counts in how good something is, then that's certainly fine. I just don't necessarily agree with it. I think it's something that you're going to always run into a dead wall of.
In hay bales, it was unique. But now, I can barely tell the difference between Assassin's Creed gameplay and every other Ubisoft game. Ubisoft thinks if they just change the era and location of each game, we won't notice. I mean, one has knives and one has guns, right? But just like hotel art, they may look different, they don't feel any different. It's the same game with a new coat of paint. This reason is why Ubisoft devs reacted the way they did. They have been taught that to make a successful game, you need to follow.
Again, this guy said only a few people, yet now he's implying that a lot of people feel the same way. Again, this is such a weird argument to base, such a weird thing to base your argument on. That like these Ubisoft developers dislike Elden Ring's success, which only a few of them come out again, and all of their things are just like, I have like disagreements with Elden Ring, but you know that's like literally like there are disagreements with Elden Ring that you can have that are like there are too many bosses. It feels not really as unique as older titles, because the older titles had bosses that felt a lot more unique instead of the copy paste ones. What like I think it was Godric. Many armed dude, bear witness, my guy. There was literally a boss near his castle that literally was just his boss fight again, but with a weaker enemy. Like that feels so undermining of the design that they went to and made for that character, to just have him as another boss, as a generic boss, and that feels very dumb, you know. And like those are issues you're gonna have with it, and again. Like, I just really dislike this sort of implication.
Follow a formula. So when a studio like From Software makes Elden Ring without the formula, and it's incredibly successful, it infuriates developers who have had their creativity restricted and pushed into a box. Now, these devs who criticize FromSoft...
Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Okay, one, that's not necessarily what those tweets said, right? But I do agree with the sentiment that a lot of developers wish they had a lot more creative freedom. But I don't necessarily think the developers who voiced their dislike for Elden Ring said that.
Should take full responsibility for what they said in a public forum. However, I also blame AAA's
full responsibility in a my dude. They're like, they just said they didn't like it. I don't necessarily think they need to get like a bloody trial done for them, saying like, hey, your crimes of disliking Elden Ring, please voice them. And it's like, oh, I don't like the minimalist UI. Ah, heretic. You must like, you know, so many UI elements that you could cause a seizure. Bloody developers. It's like
studios like Ubisoft are forcing their teams to create unimaginative copycats of the previous 10 games. We can get mad at a few devs all we want, but the real problem comes from the Ubisoft's executives choosing to be formulaic. But why?
Obviously, I agree with that.
Why are the leaders of Ubisoft and other AAA studios hellbent on producing the same type of game? Why force your devs to work on the 100th Assassin's Creed when they want to work on something new and exciting? The answer? Stability and money. This may be obvious to everyone, but milking an IP over and over again is the easiest way to make money as an entertainment company. It's the reason why we've had a new Call of Duty 19 years in a row, and also why 2022's top 20 best-selling games are all existing IP or sequels, except for Elden Ring. Seriously, look at this. Elden Ring is the only game...
I think it's fair to say Elden Ring, while not an existing IP, is definitely an IP that could not have existed without the basis of From Software's Souls-like titles, right? I think if you'd released Elden Ring like out of the blue at like, what was it released, 2020 or 20, no, it's 2021, yeah, 2021, no, it's 2022, I can't remember. But when you released Elden Ring and you didn't have any Souls-like game, like the only Souls-like game that ever existed was like Demon Souls, and like that didn't really perform too well or had much of an impact on the gaming community, right? And you just released Elden Ring, I don't think it would have done as well, because Elden Ring only did as well as the foundation that Dark Souls 1 to 3 to Bloodborne to Sekiro have set for it. I only think that Elden Ring has done so well because of the precedent that From Software set before. But that's just a minor thing.
game on here that is a new IP. What's even more crazy about this list is that 2 of the top 20 games were Call of Duty games, and 3 of them were sports sequels, which are notorious for being the exact same as their predecessor. We can complain about these games being sold as copycats all we want, but we're the ones buying.
Okay, first off, for sports games, right? I don't necessarily see the issues with sports games. Not necessarily saying they're good or bad or whatever. I don't really care, honestly. It's just like, how can you do a good sports game? There are only so few ways to do a good sports game, and it's essentially done, right? FIFA, Madden have already been perfected in that way. There's nothing else you can really introduce to those games that like can make it a better sports game. The only like you can make like Super Mario Strikers, right? You can do that. That's definitely an option, right? But like if you as a player want a realistic sports game, you already have it. Like I don't get the dislike for sports games so much, other than just like it's the same thing over and over again. Just like, yeah, I mean I can conceptually understand that people want like one sports game and that's just like ported from console to console to PC, right? Like that's not necessarily bad, right? But I do think it's a bit weird to have this vitriol of like sports games when it's like it's already like perfected, you know? Like I just don't get it, you know. Which
These soulless games in droves, and for companies to come up with brand new games and IP is risky, so studios will make sequels for as long as possible if we keep buying them. So I don't ever see studios not making sequels when we buy them year after year. That said,
also I do want to talk about like the implication of this, right? It's like it's implying that just because the game is very similar, it's inherently bad. I obviously did say this when I cracked segment went up, but like again, like what's the issue with playing a game that you like, you know? I don't necessarily think there is an issue with that. It's just like if you don't like it, that's certainly fine. I don't already mind it, you know? I'm not necessarily that miffed at like playing Assassin's Creed Revelations and Assassin's Creed 2 feeling very similar, you know? I don't necessarily mind that. I think that's fine. My issue with the Assassin's Creed franchise primarily is the fact that it's, you know, not ending. That's my biggest issue. I want a conclusion for the Assassin's Creed storyline, not really like more games that are different or whatever.
is a negative effect on your brand when you don't release something new or innovative. Think about it. What is one of your favorite games? Remember when that game was released and how you felt about the developer of that game. Pretty good, right? Then think about that specific developer's most recent games. How do those new games compare with your favorite game? And how do you feel about that developer now? Probably not great. For me, it was Blizzard and Warcraft 3. This game made Blizzard my favorite developer, and I wouldn't allow a bad word to be said about them. But now, Blizzard has released cash grab after cash grab, not to mention everything else they have done. And I can't help but look at Blizzard with disappointment. A bad game happens sometimes. But Blizzard hasn't made a good game since 2016 with Overwatch. Not to mention they somehow butchered Warcraft 3 with the release of Reforged. I just can't imagine defending Blizzard anymore. The Blizzard brand has fallen from one of the greatest video...
Well, I mean, I think that's a bit of an issue to, like, defending, like, a brand, right? Like, I talk about, like, Bioware games, but I talk about it more in a way to say what I like in video games, right? I like that style of video games. Another studio that does Bioware games is, like, Spider Game Studios. They're pretty good. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a bit of an issue to, like, make that identity thing. But yeah, I don't disagree with anything he said, at least this
game developers to a company that is compared to EA. But as we saw with Blizzard in the...
Also one thing. EA is not the worst company in America, right? Like, stop this bullshit of just like, oh yeah, EA, the worst company ever to exist. No, dude, like, when Coca-Cola has, like, sent death squads to, like, Southern America, right? I feel like there's a more wanted to a worse company, right? And even then, if we're just talking about gaming companies, it's Activision, dudes. Like, come on. Like, I don't get the whole, like, EA has Axe Studios, right? Has done that. But, like, the controversies, even before the big release that showed the huge amount of sexual harassment in Activision Blizzard, right? Even before that was released, Activision Blizzard was still the worst company. It's just like people were so fixated by EA because a few YouTube videos they watched said it was the worst, which, you know, is it's a very dumb way to form your opinion.
beginning, the opposite occurs when you release something new that just blows people away.
And that's also, again, I don't like that implication. It's like, for something to be good, you have to have it be new, which isn't the case, right? It just has to be well done, you know? And, you know, that's my issue with this as well. Because, like, stop fixating on it has to be new to be good and just fixate on you have to give developers creative freedom. And if they still make the same games they did before, but this time they feel a bit happy about it because they have more creative control, that's fine. That's fine. Like, I don't get it.
Like Elden Ring, gamers will have your back, even if the game isn't perfect. I mean, look at one of the biggest controversies on YouTube, featuring the Axeman and Quantum TV.
This guy made a video saying like Elden Ring sucks or something. He hates everyone that plays Elden Ring. So Axeman made a video about like the worst take in Elden Ring.
The drama from these Elden Ring videos escalated to way more controversial stuff, like bigotry, copyright, demonetization, and the Axeman trending as the #1 story on Twitter. But all this stemmed from arguments about Elden Ring. Why? Because FromSoft had gained some huge brownie points for releasing pure art, and like any extravagant piece of art, people will have visceral reactions, both positive and negative, which is also why people get so angry when you change the story and lore of video games with TV shows like Halo or The Witcher. I mean, Witcher 3 was a beloved game, and a piece of art to so many people, not to mention the comics. So when you mess up the story and lore in the show, the community isn't toxic when they react negatively.
Well, the issue thing is, it's not like the issue is that people disliking it is bad. The issue is like, don't be a fucking dumbass. Don't be like such a child grasping at you know, something they can't have. You know, they're just screaming and whining themselves. Like, just don't do that. Just voice your concerns and just go on, right? Like, there's nothing much like anyone can do about the TV show. The TV show has already made its mistakes. There's no going back on it, right? Might as well just hope it gets a bit better. Like, again, I just don't get this like huge vitriol, because that's the big issue here. Not like people are saying that you can't dislike it. It's people saying that just don't be an asshole, right?
They are passionately asking for you to respect that piece of art as they do. Now, all this said, I don't just want to bash on AAA studios and walk away. True constructive...
Well, you can bash on them, just bash on the right people. like bash on the executives, right? Like, they're the ones you should be pulling your ire towards, right? Not like developers who have to like face through like 60-hour work weeks and who have to like face sexual harassment or just harassment in general, right? Like, don't go after them, right? Like, they're just doing their jobs, you know? Go after the people that are like actually terrible, who are actually causing the issues. Like, they're a fair target, you know?
Criticism should have ideas for improvement, not just ranting. So if I had the opportunity to consult a AAA studio, I would suggest the Pareto principle to be applied company-wide. This principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, is the observation that roughly 80% of consequences come from 20% of causes. One company effectively applying this technique is Google. During my time at Google, I saw how they allowed their employees to spend 20% of their time working on something the individual thought would most benefit the company. Both Gmail and AdSense.
Issue with that though, that's not really how games are made, exactly. Like, games need people to do their jobs, you know? You can't just like faff about and just like eventually have the game be done. The game has to be done. Google is different because it's literally one of the biggest search engines in existence, and because of that it can just like live off the ad free space. Like, Google does not need to improve in any real meaningful manner, right? There are ways that can improve, obviously, but like, there's no real way to improve Google like how you can do anything else. And like, again, games are highly different. Like, the biggest issue with video games in general is the lack of completion urgency. There's this guy, he was the Dragon Age producer, executive producer for Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age Inquisition, and a bit on Anthem. And the biggest issue that that guy has basically done, or basically saw, is that when a developer has no completion urgency, everything will eventually have to be completed really quickly at the end of the project. Like, you have 5 years to develop a game. Let's say that generously, 5 years. And if you don't have that completion urgency, you're going to be spending the last 2 years developing the game, when the first 3 years were just like faffing about doing what you want. You have to have some sort of energy towards going towards the goal, so that when you're done, you can fix anything else that's left. That's what happened with Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age Origins had, I think, like a 5-year development, and like the whole and the last, I think, year of development, Dragon Age Origins finished in its 4th year, I believe, and it was done. It was completely playable from start to finish, and it was literally the same game we got on launch. What did they do that extra year? Bug fix and work on the console versions of Dragon Age Origins. That's literally it. But they finished it earlier. The benefits of that is profound on how good it makes video games. And that's the thing that I think developers should, and anyone working in games should take to heart is that finish games earlier to make them better later. Not finish games late, make them better late. Because that's not the goal. That's not making the games better. And this 80 to 20% rule isn't really that useful in video games.
Came from this practice, and the former made Google more than $54 billion just in 2022. A more applicable example is Fortnite. The original Fortnite concept was developed from an internal game jam put on by Epic Games. Although they don't strictly follow the 80-20 rule, a game jam is just one example of its application. Letting your team take...
I wouldn't say it's not like completely disconnected, but I will say like the big difference is that game jams are a lot more controlled and not like throughout the entire process of game development, right? Another Dragon Age fact is that there was a game jam for Dragon Age Inquisition, and one of those game jams produced the giants that you fight in Dragon Age Inquisition, right? And that's necessarily really cool, right? But like that's not really anything that's substantial, right? The mode for Fortnite when it was made wasn't that substantial, right? It was fairly simple enough, you know, using pre-existing assets, and again, I don't think it's like similar or anything.
Time to work on new and innovative ideas. Just pure creativity with no deadlines. And creativity is the key to a company's longevity. You need to constantly innovate to stay alive. And it's what the AAA industry desperately needs right now. So how can we get more games like Elden Ring? AAA studios need to allocate 20% of all their resources to working on new and innovative games. No deadlines, no parameters.
Implying that innovative games are inherently better than like games that are just well done, which again I disagree with.
It's just pure creativity. Let your developers work part-time on something they are passionate about and be amazed at what they'll create. I'm not saying stop making sequels. As we saw, AAA studios make a lot of money from sequels, and sequels aren't always a bad thing. I'm stoked for Hollow Knight 2, and I pray for a Warcraft 4.
So like my only issue with that, right, the 20% rule is again, like when you're developing a game, you have to put your attention onto it. You can't just like not do that, right? That's a very dumb idea because you need to finish the game. There's obviously things you can do on the side, and you should encourage developers to do things on the side, but it's more of a controlled environment, you know. And this is obviously different for like indie games, because indie games are like have a completely different structure to like AAA games. AAA games go into like the 300s of people, and that's a very hard thing to coordinate, just like, oh yeah, 20% rule, right? Because you need a lot more structure. Well, with an indie game, it's a bit different because you can at least observe people and how well they're doing their jobs, you know, or how fast they're trying to complete the game. Again, it's not inherently a bad idea, but I don't think it's that helpful at all.
However, for AAA studios to be profitable while garnering the love and support of the gaming community, AAA studios should look at Elden Ring as an example to stop making formulaic games while applying Pareto's principle to let their developers conceptualize and build masterpieces we all will appreciate, like Elden Ring. Hey, thanks to everyone who joined our Discord.
Again, I don't necessarily dislike this video entirely. It's better than most ones, but I still dislike the focus on AAA games are inherently bad because they're not new. That's not a good argument, because that's implying that no matter how well executed they are, they will always be bad forever, right? It's like, that's not how it works exactly. It's how good they're made is what, at least in my opinion, determines if something's good or not. And the big issue here is that AAA games are buggy messes or whatever because of the people in charge of them. And the focus should be not on like the individuals or the brand, it should be on those people. And what necessarily this means is like you can't really do much about that. Most executives aren't really going to be like that pestered by like someone on Twitter ratioing them into oblivion, right? They're still going to make money, they're still going to be really rich, and they're still going to be real pieces of shit who abuse the power, right? Like that's still going to happen, right? But like, to me, I just don't necessarily think it's good to focus on that, because it doesn't really address or talk about the real issues here. But yeah, this guy made a similar video as well. I also dislike it as well because, again, it implies that, again, games that are different are inherently better than games that are the same. Again, I just think it's a very bad argument. But yeah, if you do want to watch the video, it is literally in the description below, so go watch it there. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any issues with it, then please do tell me.